Alrighty, so for today's video, we are ranking backwards compatibility using a very special system. We are using the Sonic the Hedgehog ranking system. What does that mean? Well, if you know the Sonic ranks, if you've ever played Sonic, so S is superior, A is awesome, B is alright, C is okay, and D is terrible. So we're going to start with Xbox in the Xbox 360. I did some really good research on this. So it is compatible with the original Xbox. However, only 48%, as I look at my whiteboard over here with some major notes, only 48% of its library is backwards compatible, which means 52% of it isn't backwards compatible. What does that mean? Ignore that. Ignore that. That's a glitch. I give it a B rank. At least having majority of your original Xbox library backwards compatible is useful. It is useful for many different reasons, and I give it a B rank. Well, yes, 50%. It's probably got the best backwards compatibility out of all the consoles. Now the Xbox One. Now, originally the Xbox One wasn't backwards compatible until 2015. And when it was backwards compatible with the original Xbox and the Xbox 360. But there's a catch. Only 6% of the original Xbox library is backwards compatible via its backwards compatibility program. And only 29% of 360 games are backwards compatible. Which means a good chunk of games aren't backwards compatible. I learned that the hard way with Sonic 06. Anyways, what's their rank? I give it a D rank. What's the sense of having backwards compatibility? And I'm going to say this with the PS3 as well, as soon as we get it, if it's not going to be backwards compatible with everything. It just sucks. So we know the next one is kind of a hint. What the OG Xbox 360 and Xbox One is the Xbox Series X. While I could give it an A for its Xbox One backwards compatibility, it's brought down by the Xbox and the Xbox 360's backwards compatibility. Therefore, it gets a... Sadly enough, it gets a C. If you can see the C, congratulations. Good news. I tried the best. Now, PlayStation with the PlayStation 2, when it comes to the backwards compatibility, it's backwards compatible with the PlayStation. Which means, and it's also backwards compatible via hardware from that console as well. Example, which I have right here. Example, like the memory cards. I give it an S rank. The fact that it is backwards compatible with the PlayStation is amazing. That makes it so much easier to play PlayStation games, and that's why it deserves the S rank. Now the PlayStation 3. This one's not gonna be good for anybody. So it is compatible with PlayStation and PlayStation 2, but only certain models of the PlayStation 3 are backwards compatible with PS2 hardware, and only select PlayStation Classic Collection games are compatible with the PlayStation 3 via PS2 backwards compatibility. It gets a C. It's alright. If you're looking for the OG model PlayStation, that way you have the PS1 and PS2 backwards compatibility, that's good. Unfortunately, newer models got rid of that PS2 backwards compatibility. Now, the one redeeming factor is it's backwards compatible with all PS1 games. So I guess there's a benefit and there's a good and bad when it comes to the PlayStation. Now the PS4, I actually had to do research on this one. It's only compatible with digitally PlayStation, PS2, and PS3 games. But it's only games from the PlayStation Classics collection. So it gets a D. It's the fact that it's not backwards compatible via hardware, and much of that is due to the it was to make it A, user-friendly, and B, the controller design of the PlayStation 2 getting rid of PS4, sorry. Getting rid of the start and select buttons kind of had it a major factor to do with it. But digitally, of course, it is backwards compatible, so that's a good thing. But it's only with digital games. Yeah. Now to the PS5. It is compatible with the PlayStation. It's basically the same games that were available via digitally on the PS3 through PlayStation Plus. But it is backwards compatible with digital and hardware from the PS4. It gets a B. At least it's better than the PS4. It is a lot better than the PS4 when it comes to PS4 with the PS4 to PS5. Now, it's held back, obviously, being you can only play PlayStation 1, 2, and 3 games digitally with PlayStation Plus. And it's only certain tiers of PlayStation Plus, similarly with the PS4. So, now for Nintendo, we're doing the handhelds first because, unfortunately, that's going to be the best way I can explain. There's two different versions of backwards compatibility. The Game Boy Color is compatible with Game Boy games. It gets an S rank. Not only that, if you've ever played a Game Boy game, original Game Boy game on a Game Boy Color, you get color added to those games. While it may be monotone colors, it is still colorful enough to play. I will give it an S rank any single time. The Game Boy Advance. Now, except for the Micro, it is backwards compatible with the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. I thought about dwindling it down to an A rank. It still deserves an S rank. Being backwards compatible with the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color is very cool. It's very unique. And to me, that's an important part of... Sorry, I got a scratch there. Of the Game Boy Advance. Now the Nintendo DS. It is compatible with Game Boy Advance games, but only certain models are backwards compatible. Example, the DSi XL, which I have right here in my hand, as well as the regular DSi, is not backwards compatible. Comparative to, if I can find my DS in my mess of, I'm sure it's in here somewhere. Sorry about this. Unlike, what's in here? Oh, unlike the DS, which is backwards compatible via this back slot, right here. So it kind of brings it down a little bit, but I give it a C rank. It's all right for certain models being backwards compatible, but not all models being backwards compatible. That's all right, but it's not perfect. It's okay, but it's not perfect. Now the 3DS family, it is somehow backwards compatible with Game Boy, Game Boy Color, the Game Gear for some odd reason, the NES, and the DS. It is not backwards compatible with the Game Boy Advance. Once again, the 3DS doesn't have the slot right there. Once again, the DS, even though I have a 3DS, kind of like the DS, later models of the DS, doesn't have that port. And of course, I'm using my DS for that example. And of course, you can also see it right here on the 3DS as well, because that's where the audio jack is. Why? So, what is it back? Is it? It isn't. I'm gonna give, even though it's not backwards compatible with the Game Boy Advance, I give it an A rank because of the Virtual Console. Now, that doesn't exist on the 3DS anymore because the Nintendo eShop is closed. But it gets an A rank for that. It's really a good rank. Now, the Nintendo Wii is backwards compatible with the NES, SNES, N64, and Sega Genesis via the Wii Shop or the Virtual Console, whatever you want to call it, and backwards compatible with GameCube. But the Wii Family and the Wii Mini models aren't backwards compatible. But it still gets an A rank because it is backwards compatible, once again, similar to what the PS2 was with the PS1 but with controllers, with the GameCube controllers and memory cards. But what was also unique about the GameCube, and I did this in a separate video, is you could use the Game Boy or GameCube controller on select Wii games, which was kind of unique. Now the Wii U is backwards compatible with, digitally of course via Virtual Console and Wii technology, blah blah blah, we're not going to get into that. It's backwards compatible with those consoles and the Wii. It is not backwards compatible with the GameCube, however, but it is backwards compatible with the Wii. It gets a B rank. Unfortunately, it not being backwards compatible with the GameCube was, I guess, a factor in this. But unlike the Xbox One, majority of the Wii's, I think all of the Wii's library was backwards compatible via the discs, which was cool. So that's why it gets a B rank. Now, the Nintendo Switch. It is only backwards compatible with the NES, SNES, N64, Genesis, Game Boy Color, and GBA via Nintendo Switch Online. It is not backwards compatible digitally or physically with Wii U, or GameCube. Because unlike those consoles, which were disc consoles, the Switch uses cartridges. About maybe this big. But it gets a D rank. It's not necessarily great, especially since it's only certain titles in those libraries, obviously. But at least you have some sort of you have some way to play older games, which is nice. But it's terrible. I will say that there's not a lot there's some good games in that library, but there's a lot of games that I don't want to play in that library. Now the Switch 2. I'm not going to even say all that. We already know majority of that. Of course, with this console, it is via emulation backward compatible with the GameCube. And of course the Switch. And I give it a C. Of course, you can't see the C, but I think you can clearly see that's a C. It's better than the Switch, but you still can't play Wii U, DS, or 3DS games. And that's similar to why I gave it the D for the Nintendo Switch, because you can't play DS, or 3DS games as well. I mean, a lot of those games did eventually get ported to the Switch, as well as now to the Switch 2. But it's still not great. Now to Atari. Oops, I forgot about the Sega Saturn. So to Atari and Sega. Obviously, you see a Sega down there. I messed up when I was doing my thing, apparently. My things. So Atari is compatible with the 2800 via Atari had to make a special converter to make it compatible with 2800 games. But gives it a C rank. At least at least you have the backwards compatibility with the 2800. Of course, the hardware is a lot different between the 2800 and the 5200. And then, of course, you have the 7800, which is backwards compatible only with the 2800 due to the fact that the 2800 and 7800 had similar hardware, but the controllers were a little bit different. It gets a D, though. It's not compatible with the 5200. And obviously, the Sega Genesis, compatible with the Master System. Oh. That's where I messed up. It gets a B. At least, this was the only Sega console backwards compatible with the Master System. Every other Sega console wasn't backwards compatible with itself. So what did I... Of course, obviously, you know how I did the backwards compatibility. This is the final part of that slide. The way I did the backwards compatibility was if it was backwards compatibility with its native hardware or specially made hardware, digitally via online resources, and finally, if it was physically and digitally backwards compatible. And that is all for this. That is all for this video, and we will see you later.